have a bit of a conundrum. I've been playing a ton of a game, Moonstone, which I love, and in terms of terrain, I have the Rolls Royce of terrain, the whimsical cottages printed in resin, which means they're perfect. But they're also heavy and fragile, which is no big deal because they only need to move from my shelf to my gaming table back to my shelf. However, I've been playing a lot of Moonstone at the friendly local game store, and that means I have to pack it up and transport it. And after the last time I did that, and I took a left turn and I heard a crunch in the back seat, I wanna try again. I wanna make some travel terrain. I've printed a few more whimsical cottages, and this time, instead of resin, I printed them in FDM plastic. You hear that? That's the sound of fantasy building parts that are light and strong, and in fun colors. Along with the whimsical cottage parts, I also threw in the tree from our Gothic Administratum set. Every town square needs a good tree. These parts are from our previous terrain pack that can be purchased on our website, EonsOfBattle.com. A subscription to our website gets you a credit that you can use on any terrain pack we have ever made. Most of these parts were printed with a standard 0.2mm layer height, and they look pretty good. The roofs in this scale with all those shingles looked good, but after a second try at fine setting with a 0.12 layer height, they were looking shockingly smooth. All of these prints were with the standard 0.4mm nozzle that the machine came with, and speaking of that machine, the printer I used is the Bambu Lab A1 combo. It's incredibly easy to use, and Bambu Lab printers have features that make it even easier, like the automatic material system that holds and loads 4 spools of filament. This allows for making multiple colored prints seamlessly, like on this decking, or if you want to print different batches of parts in different colors like I did on these fairy houses. The AMS removes the hassle of switching filament. The Bambu Lab filament has an RFID that syncs with the printer and automatically prints the filament with the recommended settings. We print a lot of terrain with the Bambu Lab A1 combo, and there's no more worry about running out of filament. If you place 2 of the same rolls, the AMS will use up all of one spool, then automatically switch to the other when the first run's empty. No waste, just printing. From December 3rd to January 3rd, explore amazing offers on our XMAS page and grab the best deal of the season. Link in the description. Now, one problem to overcome is what glue to use. Superglue would probably work fine, but I want to try something new. Superglue likes a super smooth surface, but FDM still got a little bit of air trapped in there. And so what I'm thinking the best glue to use is gonna be some E600. This stuff is supposed to have a little bit of give, and it doesn't dry instantly like super glue, and so I'm gonna have a little wiggle room where I can get the parts perfect. I've never used this glue before. It's a rubber cement. I started off sanding the surfaces that are getting glued. I want to erase the layer lines and get them nice and flat. But unlike super glue, I don't have to get the surfaces glass smooth. A little roughness will actually help. I spread the glue on the 2 halves and then firmly press them together, squeezing it so that the glue squirts out the sides of the bond. This glue is decently tacky, so I can set the parts aside to dry while I work through the rest of the pile. Once this layer of rubber dries, I'll have parts with a little bit of give. This will help them survive even the most brutal games of Moonstone. On the roofs, one side of the roof is flat and the other side has a balcony, so these spots need a door. I sanded down the support column and added a door and awning. In Moonstone, elevation matters. In fact, my faction, the fairy faction, can ignore vertical distance as they can fly. So I especially like to have verticality in my terrain. I let the E600 dry overnight and it seems pretty good. I mean, it's been holding my Crocs together for the last 2 years, but it is kind of a weird rubber cement glue. I don't want to go full force and break my nice buildings, so I actually put together some test pieces. I want to see. All right, that broke with a good amount of force, and then with a little bit more glue, which is kind of more like what's pulling these buildings together. Ooh, can't get enough leverage. Okay, I think these buildings are gonna hold. Now, to get these guys ready for painting, there are layer lines, but they're really, really subtle. I could probably get rid of them a little bit with some sanding, but I don't think I need to, because I have some automotive filler primer. So I think a little dusting of this to just make those subtle layer lines even more subtle, and then a layer of primer. I think that'll be good. Filler primer is just that, filler. It builds up a thick skin. I sprayed on 3 layers of this, not drenching the parts, just 3 nice coats. And now that the parts aren't Fisher-Price colors, I can see how well the detail's printed. This gives me an idea. I took some desert sand texture paste and slobbered this on. This worked really well for the natural tree and the walls of the houses. I could have sanded these, but the layers are so tight. The filler primer and just a little bit of texture paste hides any crimes and gives more texture than was there originally. On the tree, I sprinkled some sand into the well of the tree. This piece was designed for a bombed out Imperial Palace. I want to make it look more well cared for. I locked down the sand with a layer of ultra thin superglue. In a few spots, the FDM might look a little bit better than the resin. On the floor, the wood grain lines up with the printing grain, making it look extra convincing. I took the parts back outside for a coat of black spray primer, and after bringing them back inside, I used my airbrush to touch up the spots that were hard to hit with the rattle can. The fun colors were nice to look at, but it probably would have made more sense to print these fellas in black. Looking at the plastic prints, a couple of coats of primer, a couple of coats of body filler, it's pretty darn good. I've got my original resin right here, and comparing the two, they're pretty darn indistinguishable. The real test is going to be to paint it up and then do some comparison, but right now, it's pretty spicy. Oh, and this tree. I'm really excited about this tree. I bought some stuff to try out on this tree. You know what? I'm starting with the tree. I have a few of these printed in resin, and they make for some really nice terrain. I started out with my airbrush of brown and then a spray of red brown from above. Then I dry brush some tan. Usually I wouldn't want to dry brush a 3D print because it would highlight the layer lines, but this tree doesn't really have any. It just brought out the lovely details in the print and the sand that I put on there. I made up a brown wash, added some speed paint and thinner, and gave the trees a dunkin'. Then I used my airbrush to get some highlights on the tops of the branches and trunks with some tan paint. I turned the PSI way down on my airbrush to get some splatter painting, getting a little bit more texture on the tree and a little more dry brushing of the same color. Adding all these tan tones made the tree a little bit too yellow for my taste, so I browned it back up with some raw umber and burnt umber ink through the airbrush, then just a little bit more of the wash I made up. On the stones, I hit these with 3 layers of gray, dry brushing of a mid-tone gray, a sponging of light gray, and then a sponging of white mixed with just a little bit of gray. Then a dry brushing of a little bit of white paint. The texture was looking really good, so I mixed up a gray speed paint wash and threw this over top. Now onto the leaves. I dipped into my collection of scrap foam that I used for sponging and tore up some chunks. I wish I had some bigger pieces, but I can glue these smaller bits together. I stuck these down with a little bit of super glue. This will be the foundation of my leaves, and I want the tree to look really full and healthy. For the leaves, I have these scale leaves in a bunch of different colors. I mixed up a batch of mostly red and yellow with a little bit of green thrown in there, and then I got to work saturating the foam with wood glue. I sprinkled on the leaves and they were not sticking. So the wood glue is not working at all. I tried switching to some scenic glue. This is a little bit tackier, but it's really wet and watery, so it's soaking into the foam and it's not staying tacky on the outside. I'm gonna try switching to some spray glue in a last-ditch effort to save this tree. I sprayed this glue on over my garbage can. Spray glue is really nasty because it's aerosolized sticky. You don't wanna get this on anything you don't want sticky. This stuff is made for paper. It makes an instant sticky surface, so I was able to get the leaves to stick on. And once I had a layer of leaves, I sprayed it again and then again, doing 3 layers of leaves so that all the foam was hidden. This made a big ol' mess and I used up almost all of my leaves, but at least I got most of them on the tree. The spray glue did work to get the leaves on there, and I currently have my tree drenched in scenic glue, and I think I'm gonna be giving it a few more sprays because I do wanna travel with that tree and I don't wanna lose leaves, so hopefully I can create like a hard shell around those leaves to just keep them stuck on the tree. A project much more straightforward is gonna be replicating my fairy house paint scheme on these new bad boys. On the tree I was learning, but now I can switch to a tried and true paint scheme. First, a dusting of red brown everywhere. Then for all the shingles, a dry brushing of orange. This was something I figured out before and it helps the houses be really color saturated. Then I started picking out the shingles with the red and dark brown speed paint, hitting about a third with the red, a third with the brown, and then leaving a third alone. Then I gave the roofs another dry brushing of yellow and then finishing it off with a dusting of tan. After these coats of paint, the layer lines disappeared. Moving on to the flooring, I gave them a blasting of tan paint and then picked out some of the planks with the brown speed paint. Then I soaked everything in a dark brown wash. I hit the door using the same speed paint, painting it around the perimeter and using a clean brush to give it a smooth transition. Once that was dry, I used some raw umber ink through the airbrush to soften the contrast and then sprayed on a burnt umber around the perimeter to add a vignette of dirt around the flooring. Now onto the walls. This is a 3-coat system. First a base coat of green paint, then a dry brushing of gray paint, and then a stippling sponging of tan. The stippling makes the tan paint layer transparent so you can see the previous layers underneath. Once I was happy with the look, I finished it off with a sponging of white paint to add just a little bit more grit and texture. I put a dark brown wash over all the bare wood parts and then dry brushed a yellow over the wood for warmth. Then I dry brushed a tan over the yellow to bring back some of the brown. While I had brown on my brush, I also threw this over some of the other parts of the house, like the doors and the exposed wood bits. One detail I ran out of time for my last batch was hitting the door hardware with a base coat of black paint and then some highlights of gunmetal and silver. Now these houses are finished, and finished a little bit better than my previous attempt. I'm definitely going to be printing more of our terrain in FDM. And speaking of our terrain, for the month of December, we made The Fall, Part 1, Buildings. The easiest way to get a ton of big terrain really fast. This set focuses on small printable decorations for cardboard, foam core, or Pringles cans buildings. Build out a grimdark militarized fort dripping with details. The selection of sandbag-laden battlements, barbed wire defenses, armored wall decorations, and noble eagle lookout posts. This set allows for large terrain to be built in record time, and it has printable textures to add detail and decorations to take the terrain to the next level. This is the first of 3 releases that focus on getting a proper 40K board up and running and as easily as possible. Looking at the FDM next to the resin, they're pretty darn indistinguishable. You can tell a little bit in the wood, although that also comes down to, I think I dry brushed it quite a bit heavier. But overall, it does not look like a 3D print. Well, it doesn't look like a plastic 3D print. It's pretty darn good, and it's super light. I don't want to clunk this one, but I think this guy can take a beating. 2 more whimsical cottages done, it is now time to take another look at that tree. I think I have about 5 coats of PVA glue on these leaves, and they aren't falling off, which is good. I sprayed a little bit of raw umber from above and some burnt umber ink from below to work in some of the colors that are on my buildings to bring it all together. Then I sprayed on some matte medium to get rid of the shininess from the spray glue I used. The leaves are pretty darn good. They're definitely stuck on there. I think I will have a little bit of shedding in my first few games, but I think it'll work. If I was to do it again, I might use the E600 glue on this. I'm not quite sure why I didn't. I thought that wood glue was gonna be the perfect thing because what these leaves actually are is birch seeds. And so I thought wood glue on wood would be the perfect thing. But I do think a little bit of rubber cement actually would have been a little bit better. But overall, I am very, very happy with this tree. The lovely fall colors kind of make it feel like a happy tree, where before it was a very scary tree. And now it fits perfectly with my little houses. And speaking of those little houses, I'm pretty pleased with these little houses. They turned out just about perfect. I lost maybe like 5% detail, but what I gained is light and strong. These guys, probably all 3 of these pieces together, weigh about as much, if not less, than the original resin house. These guys are gonna travel so much better, be so much stronger. Oh, they're lighter and stronger. Oh, I could have gone double decker. I could have had double houses and they still probably would have been lighter than that guy. FDM printing is pretty good now. I remember doing a lot of FDM printing back in college in the old architecture laboratory for classwork, but often for like cosplay stuff. And I remember being pretty amazed at how good it looked. And then I would spend like 50 or 60 hours of Bondo and sanding to get it looking really, really good. These look pretty darn good. And I did hardly anything to get them looking this good. Ooh, I might have to get back into some cosplay stuff. Let me know in the comments below if I was to make a 40K prop. Should I go bolter, plasma, or something Xenos?